Hello, everybody. Hello, good evening and welcome. And I should say good morning and good afternoon as well, depending on where you're joining us. Welcome to the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre's Tuesday Talks. My name is Anne Traherne and I'm founder of the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre. So it's my great pleasure to be chairing for you this evening with my good friend, Ian Rubenstein. Now, the talk, hi Ian, and welcome, and I should say welcome back, but we'll come to that in a moment, because Ian's talk is entitled Medicine, Mediumship and Messages from Beyond. And let me mention right up front as well that Ian's book is called Consulting Spirit. So you'll find that on Amazon. So we'll be referring to his book, Consulting Spirit, because of course he's a consulting GP, is a doctor from Enfield. For those who are joining us from further afield, that's London, that's North London. Of course, Enfield was made famous by, or infamous by, the Enfield poltergeists, not far from Ian's consulting studios, but that's a different topic for a different night. Ian's background, of course, a medical man. His background is in science. Excuse me. Is a professional physician and a self-described skeptic. Medical school doesn't allow consciousness to survive death. And it certainly doesn't allow communication with dead people. And that is something that he had to deal with when his dead grandfather turned up in his consulting rooms one day. So this started his journey into mediumship, and that's what he's going to talk about this evening. I'm saying to you, I'm welcoming Ian back because he was with us. He came to the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre in person. Remember those days? In person to give this same talk about 4 years ago, we remember. And it's such a good one that we've welcomed him back because we have a different audience now. We're online and we're reaching people in different countries as well. So the story is worth telling. And tonight he's dispensed with a lot of his PowerPoint. He'll just be having some of his words behind him on screen because he's going to be talking directly to you, the audience, and it will allow plenty of time for questions because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about this story. And I also believe he's got some of his patients with him in the audience tonight as well, so that will be interesting. So without further ado, over to you, Ian.
Oh, thank you, Anne.
Please welcome Dr. Ian Rubenstein.
Thank you, everyone. Well, it's nice to be back in Edinburgh virtually. I'm in the same old position where I normally consult with my patients in my dining room, but that's the pandemic. So yeah, it's great to be talking to you, and I'd like to share my story with you. And I'm going to be talking about my experiences as a GP. And before I start, for the Americans here, I'm sure there are a few, a GP is a primary care physician. And when I mention my surgery, I'm not talking about cutting people open. I'm talking about the place I work. So a health centre where primary care physicians work is called a surgery. And strangely enough, my doctor's room is also called my surgery. So that's just a little bit of translation here. So tonight I'm going to be talking about a little bit about me as a doctor and how I fell into mediumship, why and how I trained as a medium, and then I'm going to give a few examples of how I use mediumship in my work. There may be a couple of my patients in the audience. I'm not sure. We'll see. Yes, so I live and work in London. Here's a little map of London. My surgery is in Enfield, which is the borough of London, within the orbital motorway. And as Anne mentioned, my surgery, my health centre, is just a stone's throw away from the house where the famous Enfield poltergeist was in. And actually, a few of my patients were involved in the Enfield poltergeist incident, but I'm not going to mention that this evening, apart from the fact that clearly my provenance improves because of my link with Enfield. So This is the area I work in. It's a typical suburban North London borough. The area I work in is not the most well off of areas. It's fairly mixed. We have a lot of working class people. We have a large number of Bangladeshis. We have our mosque, and we have a lot of Kurdish speaking Turks. And I think about 165 different languages are talked in the borough of Enfield. It's quite an interesting area to work in. And with some of the areas are quite high deprivation. We run a full surgery there. We do all the usual stuff. And actually, I'm quite normal, believe it or not. This is me at work. And apart from the mediumship, I mean, I have other ordinary. I've been published in various medical magazines. I've done some work for cancer, transforming cancer services team in London. All the doctors in London use forms I developed for referring patients to hospital if they have suspected cancer. I've been published in the British Medical Journal about placebos, and I'm a fellow of the Royal College of General Practitioners. All very normal, all very worthy, perhaps. So how did I get from this to this? This is me, an article they ran on me in the Mail on Sunday in 2009, and that august journal, Fate and Fortune magazine, that published an article about me. So this is the story of how I fell into all this. This is me at school, around about 1970, 1971. And this is me at the back. Notice the hair and the beard, with all my friends. So if those of you who were around at that time will remember that one of the pastimes we all used to like doing those days was the Ouija board. So every Saturday night, my friends and I would meet at my house, and we set up my Bunsen burner, which was like a gas cylinder with a little flickering flame. We'd upend the wine glass, we'd get the Scrabble letters out, and we would play with the Ouija board. And once we got some really interesting messages, we started getting this message which said, water in the light, danger, water in the light. Well, this carried on for about 5 or 10 minutes, and we really didn't know what was going on. And after a while, it got a bit boring. So I said, look, let's clear it all away. I'll go and make some coffee. So I left the room we were sitting in to play with the Ouija board, and I entered the kitchen. As I turned the light on in the kitchen, I noticed there was this peculiar yellowish cast to the light. There was a goldfish bowl type light in the kitchen looking just like this. And as I looked up, the reason why it was yellowish was because it was half filled with water. Now, no one had left the room, and I was the first one. And if any of my friends had seen this, of course, we weren't stupid, we would have mentioned it. So, I mean, plainly the board had spoken the truth. And what had happened was that the bathroom was above the kitchen, and it was an old Victorian house. It had been raining. The window had been left open. Wind had blown the rain in. It had pooled on the floor, and as water does, it had followed the path of least resistance and tracked through the wiring and half filled the goldfish bowl light. So we just stood there. I screamed, looked up at it, and went, oh, that was really interesting. But and I've had some quite interesting experiences since then. But if the men in black said to me, look, we're going to wipe your brain of all your paranormal experiences, just choose one, I would choose this one. Now, this isn't my friend Felicity, but it's a reasonable likeness of it. It is an image I got off the internet. So I was now in my first year at medical school, and I was age 19. We're talking about summer 1974. And I went to Nottingham Medical School, which is in the English Midlands. My friend Nick studied physics at Leicester, about 30 miles from Nottingham. So I used to meet Nick fairly often. I got friendly with Nick and met all his friends. And one of his friends was called Felicity. That was his girlfriend, actually. And in the summer of 1974, Felicity came down to London and stayed with Nick. And my sister, who was age 15, and I went round to spend an evening with Nick and Felicity. And we were having a perfectly ordinary conversation. It was about midnight. All we were drinking was coffee. There were no illegal substances. We've never been into any of that. And I was just talking, as I often do. And as I looked at Felicity, I saw this. I suddenly saw what spiritualists called transfiguration. Of course, I didn't know at the time, but it lasted just a couple of seconds and then was gone. This is what I saw. It was I saw this blonde-haired snow queen type image. Now, this isn't quite the image of it. This is the nearest I could get. She actually had a fringe fringe. She had shoulder-length blonde hair like in this picture, but her lips were very thick. Seemed to be coated in a frosted white lipstick, and they were strangely distorted. But what was most captivating were her eyes, which, I mean, this image doesn't capture it captures the ethereal quality of the image of the eyes, but they were looking straight through me, and I got a message. Actually, we'd now call it a download, an instant knowing. And the message was, mark this, know there's more to life than meets the eye. One day you will understand. And I just stood transfixed, and it was gone. She was back to normal. Very, very strange. I then heard, at the precise moment, it only lasted a second or two, my sister, who was age 15 at the time, now she was sitting at the side, so she caught the profile of all of us. And she was absolutely hysterical. She was screaming at the top of her voice, "My God, can you see those lips?" And I turned around to her and said, "What, you've seen it too?" And what she saw was exactly what I saw. It's the same thing. So we obviously, I mean, Nick and Felicity didn't know that anything had happened, but we piled into I had my dad's car. We piled into my dad's car. It was now probably about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Woke my parents up. You can imagine they weren't best pleased. A car full of hysterical young kids. So they said, "Well, take Nick and Felicity home and just go to bed." So the next day, I phoned all my friends. It was very exciting. But my friend Steve said, "Look, Ian, I don't know what this was, but my next door neighbor, a medium, he's called Keith Hudson. Why don't you come and have a chat with him?" So I went to Steve's house and met this very strange young man. He was about 9 years older than us. He was tall and gangly, and he was losing his hair. Claimed to be a medium, and he showed me this book, The Phenomena of Materialization. He said, "Well, Ian, what you saw was Felicity's spirit guide. It was appearing over her." And I thought, "Well, that's a load of rubbish. I don't believe in that, But then again, my sister had seen it as well. Now, if it wasn't a spirit guide, it was a shared hallucination, which means that telepathy is real. And I was in my first year at medical school, and I think they were still landing on the moon in those days. I was heavily into science. And whatever way I thought about it, because it absolutely happened, I couldn't really work out how it fit into my worldview. So what do you do with that? And the answer is not a lot, to be honest. I mean, I used to tell the story at parties. In fact, over the years, my wife got heartily sick of me telling this to people, because I just, I trot it out every so often, and here I am still trotting it out. So you tend to sort of put it to one side and, just get on with your life. And really not much happened to me the next 30 years or so. So yeah, that was 1974. And between 1974 and 2003, nothing really happened. Well, I mean, obviously, that I got older. This is me there in 1974 with my wife, and this is us in 2003 roundabout. So you can see we got old. I had a perfectly normal professional life. I mean, I was a busy GP, primary care physician, working a lot long hours. I was writing software as well as part of my hobby, and life just went on. Oh, this guy came into my life. Actually, his name is Keith Bishop. He's a patient of mine. I'd known Keith up to 2003. I'd known Keith for 19 years, because I joined my practice in 1984, and I used to get on with Keith a lot. We were both from a similar background. We're both from working class backgrounds who'd sort of done quite well. I came from a working class background and became a doctor. And Keith had started work as a security guard at BBC Television Centre. He's a really nice guy, and he was vetted by the MOD because he had to look after a lot of VIPs. And they'd often ask Keith to do some favours for him. So after a few years, he had a pocket book full of names, and his VIP guests said, "Well, why don't you set up a PR firm, and then you can do for us as well." So he did. He set up Media Celebrity Services and looked after a few people, a few page 3 girls of the Sun, Nick Faldo, the golfer, people like that, and was doing quite well for himself. I used to speak to him. We thought that he was sort of punching above his weight. So I used to have a chat with him. When I was on call of an evening, I spend a couple of hours just, having a chat with him, sort of learning how to do counselling and stuff like that. So I knew Keith quite well. He didn't know a lot about me, but but we had a good relationship. And eventually Keith, he did very well. He made a lot of money, and he moved away from my practice, and he moved out of our area. And he actually wasn't meant to be a patient of ours, but he was still registered with us. So he had an appointment to see me, and it was 12 o'clock midday. And what I like to do is to go for a swim at lunchtime, do my home visits, go for a swim, try and keep fit, and then see my patients in the evening. And I got a rule of how I manage my work. If the last patient doesn't turn up, is late, don't hang around, because they probably are not going to turn up. And Keith was late. Now, Keith can be a little bit unreliable. He's a bit of a lovey in that respect. He's a really nice guy, but sometimes you think, well, he's got a busy life. So I just thought he was late and he wasn't going to turn up. So I decided I wasn't going to wait for him. So I tried to get up from my desk. I felt something push me down. So I tried to get up again. Something pushed me down. Then the phone rang, and it was my receptionist, Carol. She said, Mr. Bishop's PA is on the line. He's at Southbury Road Station, which is just 5 minutes from the surgery. He's on his way. Can you hang around? So I said, yeah, okay, I'll hang around, but I'm not going to wait all day. So Keith came into my room, and he was panting and short of breath, and he'd run all the way, which didn't really bode well for the consultation, because I had to take his blood pressure. So we sat and had a chat. Keith's very entertaining. He can often talk about show business, gossip, little chat. And then I was expecting to take his blood pressure. And then he looked at me and said, I've got this man here. And he says, he knows you. He says, he's your grandfather, the one you never met. And he wants to tell you something. And my first thought was, oh my God, Keith's gone mad. I'm going to have to section him. That means I'm going to have to get a psychiatrist, and I'm going to have to spend all day with a social worker, and I'm going to not be able to, and I won't be able to do any more home visits, and I'm going to be late all day. So I looked at him and said, are you telling me you see spirits or something? And he said, yeah. I said, well, how come you've never told me this before? I've known you for years. He looked at me and said, well, it's not the sort of thing you tell your doctor, is it? Because they think you're mad. And I'm thinking, well, absolutely, Keith, you're absolutely right. And he said, now listen, this is important. And he got my attention. The reason why he got my attention was because this is the grandfather I never met. This is a picture of him on Brighton Beach with my grandmother, who I also never met. The baby is my Uncle Aubrey, who was like the family head. So I mean, this is 100 years ago. This picture was taken, and I've been thinking about my grandfather, Isaac Morris, because he was an interesting character. The reason why I was thinking about him was myself and my cousins had experienced difficulties with our parents. And I'd actually had a big falling out with my parents and my sister that effectively led me being expelled from the family. Not my wider family, but my parents and my sister. It was a massive breakdown, and it was never fully repaired. And I was so distressed by this, but I was canny enough and experienced enough as a GP to know that these things often have if they're puzzling to you, you can't work out what's going on. There's something deeper going on. So I interviewed all my cousins and my uncles and aunts, and I realised that all my cousins had similar problems with their parents. In fact, their parents and my parents were better uncles and aunts than they were parents, and that to do with boundaries. And I traced it to the fact that my grandfather, he was a very successful baker. He'd come over from Poland. The Jews in the late 19th century had fled ethnic cleansing called the pogroms, and they'd come over and set up. He was a baker in Poland, and he set up a couple of shops in the East End, and they'd done very, very well. He had two shops, one in Cable Street. If you've ever heard of the Battle of Cable Street, his shop was the first aid centre when the fascists marched through Cable Street. And he had another shop in Hackney Wick, again in the East End of London. And he'd done very well, but for the fact that he was very fond of horse racing, and at the end of the week, put his hands in the till, take the money out. So my grandmother never really knew whether she had money at the end of the week. And I think that's where this distrust of men and boys and having to control people came in my family. Anyway, so Keith said, look, he wants to come through. He's going to give, he's going to speak to me, and I'm going to listen to him. Then I'm going to tell you what he's saying. Is that okay? Well, because he'd caught my attention by talking about my grandfather who'd been on my thoughts, I said, oh, okay. he then sort of seemed to look a bit strange. He didn't go into a trance, but he seemed to be listening to something which I couldn't hear. And he began to talk very rapidly. And basically, for the next 15 or 20 minutes, told me everything that had been going on in my life. And then he looked at me and said, "You should be doing this, Doc." I said, "Doing what?" He said, "Listening to spirit." I honestly didn't know what he meant by listening to spirit. I mean, listening to spirits? What does that mean? Surely he meant spirits or the spirits. He said, "Listening to spirit." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, my guide, William, says you should be doing this." I said, "Who's William?" He said, "He used to be my boss at the BBC. When he died, he became my spirit guide." And I'm thinking, what on earth is, this is crazy. Then he said, "You're like a man on the edge of a cliff, Doc. Don't be afraid to take a leap of faith off that cliff. They'll catch you." I said, "Who's going to catch you?" "Your guides, the spirits." I thought, "Really?" And then he left my room. And I didn't know what to think. I really didn't know what to think, because I'd been confronted with the most amazing, astounding information, which he couldn't possibly have known, which was completely relevant to my life. Then he more or less told me to jump off a cliff. But it's interesting. Looking back, if we look at the symbolism of a man on the edge of a cliff, if we look at the major arcana of the tarot, this is meant to symbolize the journey. So that it's the fool's journey, the fool being an untutored soul, and it ends with the world at the bottom right of the major arcana pack, which is a symbolism of wisdom and sharing what you've learned with the world. And if you look at the fool, the wise fool, you can see he's a man on the edge of a cliff. So the question is, was my journey the journey of a wise fool, or was I on a fool's errand? Well, we'll find out. Things happen pretty quickly. It started with a dream. Now, everybody likes to tell their dreams, and it's always boring, but I'm going to tell you my dream. So I was, a couple of days after Keith gave me his message, I had a dream, and I was at the house of my Auntie Lily. My Auntie Lily was married to the baby you saw in the photograph. And my uncle had done very well. He made a lot of money in the travel industry. In fact, he founded the package travel industry in this country. And she used to host lavish parties. And in my dream, I was sitting at her long dining table, sitting opposite my cousin Carol, who's a psychotherapist. And in my dream, she was saying to me, "Can you do a chest X-ray on my patient?" And I was trying to fend her off. I was saying, "I can't do this. They're not my patient. And anyway, I'm not psychic and I can't see auras." And with that, I heard a voice to my left, a Cockney voice, saying, "Of course you can, boss. I'll show you." I turned to my left, and at the head of the table was a little dumpy man who looked like he was from India, but he was wearing a flat cap. And above his head was a wall light. And he turned around and flicked the light on, and all these colors came out. And the most amazing color was this gem-like shaft of blue. And he said, "What do you do with all that blue?" And in my dream, I just said, matter of factly, "I give it to people." And as I said it, I woke up crying my eyes out. And I remember rolling over to my wife saying, I woke her up and said, "I think I've gone mad. I've had this really weird dream." I told her about it. And she said, "Well, you've always been a bit mad, but I still love you. Go back to sleep." So I knew that I wasn't going on this journey on my own. That was just a dream. That could have been anything. But the next thing that happened was really quite strange. So it was the day that my son Josh was getting his GCSE results, and I was quite tense. So the plan was that I would do my morning surgery and try and get home so that I could see what his results were. So in the UK, as you know, most GPs will do a home visit or two at the end of the morning surgery. But I wanted to go home early. So I checked the visit book as I came into surgery and noticed there was a name in the visit book. And it was just around the corner. So I thought, well, I won't leave my car. I'll do the visit first before surgery. I'll nip there, nip back, and then I can get through my surgery and get home to see what Josh's results were. So what I did was I unhooked my car key from my keys. Sorry, unhooked my keys from my belt and left all the keys on my desk, threw them on my desk. And as I left the room, I felt a blow to the back of my neck and I heard a voice, actually heard it clearly as if it was in the room, "Pick up your keys or they'll get stolen." And I just thought, this is nonsense. I left my room I was in such a state worrying about my son's exam results that I went to the wrong house. Eventually, I found the right house, saw my patient, and ran back to the surgery. I was a few minutes late. And as I got into the surgery, my receptionist, Anne, looked at me and she said, "Have you got a blue Corsa? That's a car, make of car." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, we just chased 2 boys out of it. They've run off and taken your key." And I said, "Oh, I knew that was going to happen." She said, "Well, why on earth? If you knew it was going to happen, why didn't you take your keys with you?" I said, "I honestly don't know." So I was faced with a situation of a waiting room full of patients, a locked car that I couldn't get into. But what had happened was the 2 boys had got into my room. I think they climbed in through the open window from the car park, lifted my car key. Thank God they just took the car key. They didn't take any other keys. And they pressed the buttons to make the indicators flash to see which car it was. Got into my car, but it was an automatic car, which in the UK, as you know, aren't as common as in the States. And they didn't actually know how to start it and how to make it move. So they ran off, but they ran off and they took the key with them. The problem I had was, first, I didn't have a key. Second of all, I had my prescription pad and drugs in the car, and also my mobile phone. So that was a whole palaver. And I phoned the insurance company. They said, "Look, you're going to have to change all the locks, including the steering wheel lock. And before we can do that, you need to contact the police. You need a crime reference number." Meanwhile, my wife had come down with a spare key. They'd just taken my phone. They hadn't taken anything else, luckily. So I tried to phone the police station, which is just across the road. This is Ponders End Police Station, just at my surgery. It's actually been pulled down now. Not a nice place. The very first time I went in there was to report something that had been stolen from the surgery years before. And you had to press a buzzer to go into the door, and there were beefy policemen there who eyed you suspiciously. So I thought I'd phoned the police station, they weren't answering. So I thought, well, there's no way I can see my patients at the moment. I've just got to get this sorted. So I thought I'd just run across to the police station and try and do it from there. So I went across to the police station in a state. And when I got to the door there, it wasn't locked. Normally, when I went there before, you had to press a buzzer, and there was like a vestibule, and they let you in. Then there was another door they had to let you in. And this time the door was open. So I pushed the door open, and someone had done a makeover in the police station. Instead of the normal tatty posters, there were some strange pictures on the wall. They looked like they'd been done by children, crayon drawings, but they all had a spiritual theme to them. They had a Hindu Om symbol, the Islamic crescent and star, the Jewish symbol. There was a Christian cross. There was some Buddhas on the pictures. And as I looked at the counter, there were 3 little Buddhas on the counter. This is very odd. In front of me was one of my patients. He was in front of the counter, and he turned around and looked at me and said, "Oh, hello, Doc. Look what the bastard did to me." He took off his T-shirt and showed me all the bruises he was covered in. Of course, it wasn't his fault. He got into a fight, and this was getting mightily surreal. And I just wanted to get my crime reference number and get back to my surgery. So I took my turn waiting in line for this guy. When he'd gone out the way, I noticed behind the desk was behind the counter was a desk set back. There was a guy behind the desk with a woman, and they were looking at the computer screen. And he looked up at me and said, "I'm sorry, sir, just wait a moment. We've got this new computer system, and it's a bit slow." And as he said it's slow, I felt myself just slowing down. I thought, okay. He had the most amazing eyes. Anyway, he got up, and I realized he wasn't a policeman. He was wearing the Metropolitan Police civilian uniform, which was like a little sort of navy sweater. And he asked me for my date of birth. And when I gave it to him, he said, "Oh, you're a Leo like me." That's a very strange thing to be told in a police station. But I heard myself saying, "Oh, are you into this sort of thing then?" He said, "Yeah, actually, I'm not a police officer. I'm working here part-time. I'm actually a psychiatric nurse at Chase Farm Hospital. I'm doing a degree in contemporary spirituality, and I'm working here part-time just to earn some money to pay for the degree." And I said, "Oh, well, you'll be interested to hear my story. My car keys were just stolen, and I heard a voice telling me it was going to happen." And with that, he he slapped his hand on the table and went, "We were meant to meet then. I tell you what, I'll give you a reading." And with that, he went behind his desk and drew out a stack of American medicine cards, Native American medicine cards, which I'd never seen before. He said, look, he spread them on the counter and said, look, pick a card, and then just ask a question, pick a card, and then show it to me and we'll look up what it means. Now, at the time, I'd been writing some software. I'd written a piece of software that had taken me 9 years. I thought it was going to be the next Bill Gates, but unfortunately, that never happened. So I just asked myself in my head, will my software be successful? So I picked a card. He read it, and he looked at me and said, the meaning of this card is the world is not yet ready. I thought, great. I said, can I have my crime reference number, please? Which he gave to me. And as I left the police station, I had this strange feeling that if I were to turn around and go back, he wasn't going to be there. And there'd be a buzzer system and beefy policemen. Anyway, I went to the surgery, told my receptionist about this, and they all started whistling the Twilight theme zone because they were beginning to hear that I was getting strange things happen to me. The next day, I had to go to a party. It was in Sevenoaks at one of my cousin's house. And the very first person I met at the party was a lady who was an occupational therapist. And she told me about that she grew up in a haunted house. And by this time, I was really getting on my nerves. So I said to my wife, look, you please, you talk to her. I'm going to go and get a drink. So I went into the house to get a drink and noticed there was another garden, smaller garden on the other side of the kitchen. So I went into there, and as I walked into the garden, another one of my cousins was sitting on a swing bench, and she was saying, I used to be a spiritualist healer, but when the kids were born, I had to give it up. So I turned around to her, her name was Rose, I said, Rose, what's happening to me? I keep on bumping into all these weird spiritual things. And she said, well, they obviously want to work with you. I said, who wants to work with me? She said, spirits. I said, what do you mean by spirit? She said, well, it's spirits. So the people, when they die, you know, they become spirits. And if they're doctors and nurses, they find someone they want to work with, and they obviously want to work with you. And I said, well, this is bonkers. This can't be true. This can't be real. She said, well, you know, these things will happen to you until you wake up. So more things started happening to me, and it was getting quite destabilized. I mean, effectively, this was a Kundalini experience, which can be very, very destabilizing. I mean, weird coincidence after weird coincidence. Thank God for my patients. This is another one of my patients. This is Dave Godfrey. Dave is a former science teacher, and now he's a shamanic healer. Dave's done his time in the sweat lodges. He's beaten the drums at Stonehenge. He's a very sensible, solid sort of guy. And I told him about my experiences, and he said, Ian, you know, he said, if Spirit wants to work with you, you'll be shown the way. I said, well, what's the way? He said, well, you need to join a psychic development circle. I said, well, what are they? He said, well, they're hard to find. They run at spiritualist churches. And I said, look, I'm sorry. I'm a practicing Hindu. People like us don't go to anything called churches. He said, well, if Spirit wants to work with you, you'll be shown the way. I thought, okay, great. The next day, my wife was looking in the local Enfield Independent. Now, remember I told you that she'd heard my story about Felicity's face ad nauseum for many years. She just flicked through the paper, and she saw that the local spiritualist church, the Beacon of Light, was advertising a demonstration of clairvoyance, and the sitting medium was Keith Hudson. She said, isn't that the guy you've been telling me about when you saw Felicity's face? I said, I looked at the ad and said, yeah, it is. She said, well, we've got to go. I said, look, I'm not going there. She said, no, we've got to go. I said, I'm not going there. She said, we've got to go. So, okay, right. So I'm going to go. So this is the Beacon of Light Spiritualist Church. So we went there. Now, this is Keith Hudson. He was giving the demonstration of clairvoyance, and I sat at the back of the hall, feeling very, very uncomfortable. And Keith went off at a fair clip. He gave everybody a fairly good standard message, a fair clip. He gave everyone a message. And when he got to me, he actually said to me, sir, you have a lot of knowledge around you. You don't know you know it, but they're telling me you will very soon, and you're going to be writing a book about it. Now, interestingly enough, when Keith first met me, when I looked like this, that's the message he gave me. He didn't mention the book. He said, Ian, you've got a lot of knowledge around. You don't know you know it, but you will one day. At the time, I thought, well, yeah, I'm a medical student. He would say that. Now, this time, he gave the same message. And notice I don't look anything like, I look, he wouldn't have recognized me. I just thought, yeah, I bet he gives that to everyone. Actually, he doesn't. He only gave that to me. So there was something going on there. Anyway, at the end of the service, which actually was a service, the president of the church stood up and said, look, Mr. Hudson hasn't got a car. Can anyone give him a lift back to Walthamstow, where he lives? So I bounded up out of my chair, now full of enthusiasm, said, yeah, I will, but only if he comes back to my house for a cup of tea first. Well, he stepped back a bit because, you do get some strange people in spiritualist churches. I said, oh, Keith, it's Ian Rubenstein, the doctor. He said, oh, Ian. He said, I was just talking about you the other day. So he came back to my house for a cup of tea and he said, I told him what was happening to me. I took him back to his church, actually dropped him outside the church that he serves in Walthamstow, Vestry Road Spiritualist Church. And he said, listen, Ian, he said, you can join my circle. It's the largest psychic development circle in North London. You don't have to be a spiritualist. In fact, I don't think of myself as a spiritualist. I think of myself as a seeker after truth. Just sit in and see what you think. And as it was Keith, I thought, well, what I've got to lose. So in February 2004, I sat in Keith Hudson's psychic development circle. So most unlikely event there. I never expected that to happen, but there I was. It was an interesting phenomenon because I was sitting with a bunch of, for the most part, not uneducated, but not stupid East Londoners, Cockneys, basically. And I stuck out like a sore thumb, really. I felt uncomfortable because I just didn't know what to expect. The first guy I sat next to had a completely shaved head, was covered in tattoos and looked very skinny. He looked like Gollum out of Lord of the Rings. I thought he was going to eat me. I remember him nudging me saying, relax, Doc, I'm not going to eat you. I thought, you are. But actually, I soon relaxed. So what happens in a psychic development circle? For those of you who don't know, I bet a lot of you have sat in them, but the first thing you do is you open up. So what does opening up mean? Well, what we do, first of all, we say a prayer for protection, which is a bit like grace before meals. And the opening up idea is based on the Eastern Chakra system. So the idea is that you've got these psychic centers in your body, starting from the red one at the bottom, which you can see there, and working up to the violet one at the top. There are 7 of them. And the idea is you go through and imagining that these are beginning to become energetic. And as they do so, you imagine your aura expanding. It's all using your imagination until the highest chakra, psychic center, opens up. And you imagine that you're then linked to spirit, the spirit world. Once you've done that, you then do a form of guided meditation. Now, meditation covers a variety of things, but the meditation that's used to develop mediums is very specific, and it's called going on a journey. And the idea is to develop your faculty of imagination. Now, we think of imagination as just being fantasy, but actually we're using our faculty of imagination as a means of gaining information. So it's quite important that when you're developing as a medium, that you actually develop this. Now, most people are normally quite visual. I'm quite a visual person. Some people find that they're more auditory, but normally you would go on a journey, and the idea would be is you'd imagine yourself going on, Keith would lead you, say, look, we're going, there's a bus outside the church. We're all sitting there with eyes closed in the dark, saying, imagine there's a bus at the church, you're all getting on the bus, and you're going to, well, a lovely wood, and you're walking through the wood, and he gets you to notice the colors, feel the earth beneath your shoes, maybe hear the sounds. And afterwards, he'd actually get everybody to talk about their experience. He was very fond of medieval things. So he'd occasionally say, well, let's go, we went out a medieval banquet. Can you see the colors of the clothes? Can you hear what people are saying? Can you smell the food? Or a medieval fair, or beautiful natural surroundings. And we talk about our experiences. But that was just setting up. The meat of the whole thing was giving messages. So when you give, so the next thing is we'd all try and give a message to people. Now the idea would be that you try and concentrate on the first fleeting thought that comes into your head, which is completely different to what you're taught as a doctor. And as a doctor, you're taught to be very analytical, and you just don't go with the first thing you say. But when it comes to this sort of thing, you have to just imagine, just try and be aware of what's in the background of your thoughts. And it's a bit like an angler. You sort of you throw out a line, you wait for a nibble, and then you just let it run, let the fish run, and then you reel it in. You do that with the thought. And when you've got a thought or an image that you think, you don't be afraid to give it out. Well, what does that mean? It means don't be afraid to talk about it. If you think this thought, this image is for someone, just give it to the person who you think it's for. The question is, how do you know what this thought or image is for? It's called map reading in mediumship. How do you know where you're directed to? And fortunately, when I joined this circle, Keith was using quite a scientific technique. This was developed by a medium called Michael Redwin, I believe. So we'd all sit in a circle, and what Keith would do is he'd pick a person. He wouldn't tell us which person he was picking. It would change each week, and they'd be number one. He'd then go clockwise or anti-clockwise around the circle in his head, numbering everybody. So the last person round who'd be sitting next to number one would be who'd be the highest. So if there were 26 people in the circle, and there often were, number one he'd start with, he'd end up with number 26. Now, he'd obviously wouldn't remember the number of each person, but he knew who he started with and which direction he was going in. And that changed every week. So what he'd ask us to do was to, when we give a message, ask for it to be given with a number. And that number would indicate the person who the message was for. Now, remember, we didn't know what the code was. And Keith, although he knew where he started, he wouldn't have known until the end when he worked out which number relates to which person. And in the trade, this is called a single blind study. Actually, it's more like, a double blind study is when you use with drug trials, no one knows who's receiving what. In this case, Keith could have known who the message was for, but he actually didn't until he cracked the code at the end. So it's a pretty good way of working, of actually not allowing cold reading. You didn't know who the message was for. And interestingly enough, I found that I tended to track certain people. Well, we'll talk about the way I did this. The very first time I did it was I imagined, how do you get a number? So I had an image in my head, and I imagined that I was seeing a countdown film. Do you remember the old films that they used to have where the numbers would count down? And the very first time I did it, it stopped at number 4. And I saw a gentleman who I could describe. And what we would do, we sit in the dark with illuminated pens. We'd write down the message. We write down the number it was for and the messages and the message. And when we do this, at the end, Keith would collate, would say, well, who had number 4? What were the messages for? So he'd collate them all, and then he'd crack the code. So for number 4, I saw this man, I could describe him. And the message was, check the holiday arrangements. So that evening, when he cracked the code, it turned out number 4 was a woman called Jenny. And I described the man. And she said, well, that's my Uncle George. He always comes through with messages, but I don't know what your message is about. So I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. The following week, she came back. And remember, this was in 2004, this was, when I joined the circle. So the people weren't using the internet much to book their holidays, but she'd booked a holiday on the internet, but she had got confused, and she had checked her holiday arrangements, and she hadn't done it properly. So she said, Ian, thank you for that message, because I did check my holiday arrangements and they were wrong. So thank you for that. Well, that was interesting. And I noticed that each week I would track Jenny for a while, even though her number would change each week and I wouldn't know. And then after that, I'd go on to somebody else. That was really something that piqued my interest. After a while, the film thing got a bit boring. So I imagined that I had a whiteboard, and at the top left-hand corner would be a number. And I'd imagined that someone was drawing jokey little cartoons on it. So one evening, I saw this image of a miner, a cartoon of a miner. He was pointing to a hole in the ground. And this was a message for Joe, who was the guy with the shaved head and the tattoos, who I got to know very well. And I gave this message to him, and he said, thanks for that, Doc. My patio subsided, there's a hole in it. Thank you for that. He could take that. That was quite interesting. So, I found this was quite an interesting technique. It took me a while. I found it really hard to sort of relax my mind. and get rid of all my conditioning from my years at medical school and science training. But eventually I got the hang of it, became more comfortable with it. But then, of course, you then have to give what's called direct clairvoyance, where you don't use number technique. And one evening we were sitting in a circle, just trying to give a message to people, just thinking of something, working out where it was. I noticed that there was a new woman in the group called Joan, and she was sitting, and Roger, who was a truck driver, he said to Joan, "Oh, I can see a cone of light behind you." And that got me thinking, because I thought I'd seen a cone of light looking just like you can see on the screen here behind her. So I said, "Oh, I can see that too." So Keith looked at me and said, "What's the message?" And I said, he said, "Well, go back and ask them," meaning ask the spirit guides. So I did. When the circle finished and we were all clearing the chairs away, I went up to Joan and said, "Look, I think I worked out what this is." As I said, in the cone of light, I saw this woman in a waterfall, and she looked a bit like you, and I could describe her personality. Can you take this? I said, "I think you looked after her or something, but she looked like you." And she looked at me and smiled. She said, "Thank you. That's just what I've come for." And apparently, her sister, she looked after her sister. She died of colon cancer. And it was an identical twin sister. And she'd actually come just to get a message for her sister. And I said, well, what's the waterfall? And she said, "Well, the very last place we took her to was Aysgarth Falls in Yorkshire." She said, "Well, thank you for that. Now I know that she's still there. I don't have to worry." And she never came again. And she got a message from me. I thought, well, that's pretty good. And that went on for a few months. It was very pleasant. It really didn't impact upon my my professional life. The thing is, you have to deal with the guides. And so after a while, you have to remember that spiritualists believe that we all have spirit guides. And this picture here is of the very famous spirit guide called Silver Birch, who came through the mediumship of Maurice Barbanel, who was the first founding editor of Psychic News, claimed to be a very advanced soul in the guise of Native American Indian, although it should be said that this was just a guise. He never claimed to be a Native American. And we can talk about guides later and why they tend to show up with sort of their various stock images. And I found guides very, very difficult. The concept of spirit guides I found really difficult. I don't know why, but the idea of someone hanging around me, looking at me, did they see me when I was in the toilet? I mean, stuff like this. Be like to be a spirit guide and to have to hang around me all the time. I mean, it's hard enough being me. To have to hang around me, listening to all my rubbish. What is that? What is that about? So anyway, spiritualists say that when you have evidence of guides, you have to demand proof. And one day in our circle, we had a new teacher called Kevin Wright. Kevin was quite a guy of fixed opinion. He was a good medium, but had fixed opinions. And he said, "We've all got a monk." And one of the girls in the group, she said, "Kevin, I ain't got a monk. I got a nun. Can't I have a nun?" No, you can't have a nun. You've got to have a monk. So we've all got a monk. Funnily enough, I'd already met my monk, but he didn't look like this. He looked like this. This is a Nestorian monk. And I'd met my monk when we were doing a guided meditation. I found myself sitting on a stone bench outside a monastery that looked like this, and under the shade of a cypress tree. And this is a guy dressed up in those sort of robes. And I said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm Nestor." I said, "Who are you, Nestor?" Think I'm talking to myself. He said, "Well, we were together in a past life, Nestorian monastery in Syria in the 9th century. And I was the abbot, and you were the administrator of the abbey. And you were a very fussy little monk. We called you little brother." And he said, and that's why you're interested in office equipment. That's why you came, one of the reasons why you were born in the 20th century. And funnily enough, I've always had this fascination for office equipment catalogs and office automation, which is where my interest in computer programming. I thought, does one really get reborn just to go to Office World? I mean, really, and look at office catalogs. Is that a real reason for reincarnating this veil of sorrows? Anyway, what's the proof? I mean, how can you prove this? Well, I'll tell you a story. I wasn't going to tell this because it's fairly involved, but see if you can follow this. You're an intelligent bunch. See if you can follow this. So I went to a fairly rough school in Tottenham, North London. It was very rough. It was a grammar school, but we went comprehensive the year below me. And they started drawing from the local sink estate with some really very disturbed kids. And the best way not to get beaten up in the playground was to become a librarian, which meant, A, that you could do your homework at lunchtime, and B, you could then go home and watch TV in the evening, having done your homework. I was a bit of a swat. I was quite overweight, I had glasses, and I didn't like getting into playground fights. And when I was there, one of the other librarians was a sixth former, a prefect called Lyndon Lewington, an older version of me, 6 years older, and he used to twist my ear and call me idiot child. He left a big impression on me. When I was a sixth form, about 17, 18, I used to work at the at Muswell Hill Library in North London. That was my Saturday job. It was a terribly boring job, but I did get access to all the books that I could use for my studies. But one day, someone's mother-in-law got run over and was transferred for one day to Wood Green Library, which is now, this is what Wood Green Library used to look like. It's been, it's a new library there now. And while I was there for that one day, I met Lyndon Lewington. I hadn't seen him for a number of years. And he'd just finished a neurophysiology degree. And oh, Ian, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going to go to medical school. He said, what medical school have you chosen? I said, well, my first choice is Manchester. My second choice is the Welsh National School of Medicine. He said, have you considered Nottingham? I said, well, yeah, I've looked at Nottingham. It's a new medical school. Didn't think much of the prospectus. I mean, he took me home in his car. And I clearly remember, as I got out of his car, he leaned over the passenger seat just before he pulled the door closed, said, Ian, look at the Nottingham prospectus. It looks like it's going to be a really good medical school. And because I was in awe of Lyndon Lewington, and he was, I remembered him, he'd done something I hadn't done. He's gone to university. I looked at the prospectus and decided to take his advice. I do take people's advice. I went to Nottingham Medical School. I met my wife there. And thanks to Lyndon, I got married and got two boys. So fast forward to the 1990s. I'm in the local library. This is Bush Hill Park Library. And I'm choosing some books. My two boys are with me. They're quite young. And I look up and there's this older guy there, portly, grey, the younger wife in tow, and two little boys as well. I whispered to my wife, that's Lyndon Lewington. She said, who's that? I said, he's the guy who told me to go to Nottingham Medical School. It's thanks to him that we got married. I'm going to go up to him. So I went up to him. I said, oh, you Lyndon Lewington? He went white and said, yes. Clearly not recognizing me. I said, I'm Ian Rubenstein. You used to twist my ear and call me idiot child at school. You told me to go to Nottingham. I took your advice. Thank you very much. Here's my wife. Here are my children. He then looked at me and said, oh my God, Ian. He said, after I told you to go to medical school, I went to medical school. I'm now a consultant at the Hammersmith. And here's my wife and here's my two boys. And it turned out that his wife was a nurse and worked at the health centre not far from my wife. At which point the librarian looked at us, frowned and said, I've never heard anything so crazy in all my life. Can you be quiet? So that's the coincidence with Lyndon. Where am I going with this, people? I'll show you. What's it got to do with my guide? So I'm dealing with these guides in my head. I'm thinking a lot about my psychic development circle, and I'm choosing some books in my local library, another library, Enfield Town Library, on a Saturday morning. And my plan was to go into minutes and get some sunglasses and then go home. Then I heard a voice in my head, not out loud, but in my head saying, Ian, hurry up, choose those books. You'll be late for your meeting. I said, what's this? I said, you're me. And the voice said, no, I'm Nestor. I thought, no, you're me, really. And my voice in my head said, well, just go along with it. I said, okay. I said, the voice said, well, put the books down, go and choose your sunglasses, which I did, go to minutes, and then go into Boots. So I thought, okay, I'll go along with this. So I chose my sunglasses, left the shop, went into Boots, which is a pharmacy, went into Boots, drugstore, doors open, stood in front of in the lobby there, and said, now what? And as I said, now what? In front of me was Lyndon Lewington and his wife. And I looked at Lyndon and said, Lyndon. He said, Ian. And his wife said, Lyndon. And I said, Linda, I knew you were going to be here. I said, I didn't know you were going to be here, but my spirit guide told me I was going to have a meeting. And of course, it had to be you. And his wife looked at me and said, Lyndon. And I realized I was making a complete ass of myself. So I said, I'm really sorry, spun on my heels and left the shop. Now let's think about that. We've got several things here. We've got Lyndon and the link with libraries. He's really wrapped up in my life. And I was seeking proof. Now, I don't think that's cast iron proof. That wouldn't hold up in court. But for personal proof, that makes me think that whatever's going on, there's some validation to this idea of guides. I do have more guide stories. We can talk about that later. So how do I use all this in my work? Okay, so the very first time I gave a message was, I was given a message from a woman called Mary in my group. And she said she could see this airman behind me. Sorry, not an airman, a German soldier behind me. Did I know him? I said, well, I don't think I know any German soldiers from the Second World War. I said, I'm sorry. But then when I got home, I realized that I had a patient called Ellie Richardson who was German, and I wondered if he was linked to her. And funnily enough, the next day, she was in my 8:30 slots at my appointments. So when she came into my room, I said to Ellie, Ellie, I had a funny thing happen to me last night. I got a message from a medium, and it was about a German airman. I described him. And as I was describing him, I heard this voice in my head, Karl-Heinz. And then she looked at me and said, oh, that sounds like my boyfriend, Karl-Heinz. He was in the Panzer Regiment in the war, but he got lost. We never heard from him again. I thought, damn it, I really wish I'd given that name. So that was okay. She's taught that very well. I knew Ellie very well, and I knew that she'd seen mediums in the past. And that wasn't really a message I gave. Then I had another lady called Pat, and her husband Tony had died, and she was a spiritualist. And when she came into my room, I could see Tony holding some blankets under his arms in my doorway. And I said, oh, Pat, I can see Tony with his blankets. And he said, oh, yeah, he's giving me a message saying that I need to give the blankets that we made for him. The idea was when he passed, we'd give him to local hospice. So thank you for that. So she took that message quite well. I thought, that's interesting. This is Lucy, Lucy Osterman. This is an amazing message. She came into my room. She's 66-year-old at the time. And she's normally a bright, bubbly lady. But she was completely tearful, bereft. And I took a history from her for 15 minutes. I couldn't work out neither she or not she was so depressed. And she said, look, you've got to give me something to help me. And to my eternal shame, I thought, well, I'll stick you on some antidepressants. And I pulled out the prescription from my printer for citalopram, an antidepressant. I felt a blow to the back of my head and heard a voice saying, ask her about her father. And with that, I could see this misty outline of a man over her left shoulder. And I said, Lucy, tell me about your dad. She looked at me and said, he was killed 38 years ago in 2 days' time. So this was the 6th of December. And 2 days' time would have been the 38th anniversary of his death by the IRA. Do you think that's why I'm depressed? And I thought, and I said, well, you know, could it be an anniversary effect? And the story is that she's Irish Catholic, and as obviously was her father, but he spoke out against the IRA during the start of the Troubles, and she thinks, and he probably was killed by the IRA, although she's got no proof of this. She was in service in Manchester and on the ferry coming back to Ireland when she got back. He'd been found shot and his body dumped in a drain. She'd always felt that her father was around her, but her family said, look, we're to believe this. So when I actually told her this, she immediately realized why she was depressed. She stopped crying. She said, well, thank you, doctor. Now I know why I'm depressed. I don't need your silly pills. And she stopped crying and she just left my room. My jaw was on the floor. I thought, my career is now over. She went outside, spent about 10 minutes speaking to my receptionist, Carol, about what I told. I thought, well, this is it now. This is it. I've finished. My career's out. No longer be a doctor. A month later, she comes back into my surgery, all smiles. I said, Lucy, what's wrong? She said, nothing. So I said, well, why have you come to see me then? She said, I've come to tell you a story. So she smiled and sat down on my chair. She said, 2 weeks after I saw you, Doc, I was at my Irish social club. There's this creepy geezer who's got the second sight, and he was tugging on my coattails. He said, Lucy, 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 I've got a message for you. come into this room, I'll give you a message. She said, if you've got a message for me, you can give me that message right here in the hall. He said, do you know there's a fellow over your left shoulder? I think he's your father. And she put her hands on her hips and said, of course I do. My doctor told me that 2 weeks ago. She said, you know what, Doc? That sure took the wind out of his sails. That actually transformed her life. Lucy came to one of my lectures, and her son actually told me just how much of a change it made. How did I end up in Fate and Fortune magazine? So look at that, a murderer stole my legs. I love that. I love that. You can see my psychic GP gives me messages from the dead. So Brian Beckinsale, you've ever heard of Richard Beckinsale, the actor? He's a distant relative of Richard Beckinsale. So Brian was a lovely guy, big guy, and he had an operation on his tongue, a tiny little operation on his tongue. Unfortunately, what no one knew was he had leukemia at the time. He actually bled to death and died on the operating table. His wife, Linda, if you can imagine, was shocked, as was I. And when she came into our room, and as she came into my room, there was Brian. Now, I couldn't see him, but it was like you know you're in the room with someone, you close your eyes, you can sense their presence. He was there. In fact, he was actually where my filing cabinet was, to my right. And I could just sense it. I could hear him saying, hello, Doc. Tell her I'm not gone. And I just said it. It just came out. I said, Linda, I think I've got Brian here. And he tells me he's not gone. And she went, oh, really? She said, can you hear spirits? I said, look, yeah, I've been training as a medium. I don't think I believe this stuff. She said, well, what's he saying? He then proceeded to tell me basically about their garden pond. They had this delicate pump mechanism, which he was always servicing. And he gave me complete details about how to service it. And she sort of said, oh yeah, that's right. She said, oh, thank you. And one thing I've realized is when men die, they get really upset over their sheds and garages. He gave me a blow-by-blow account of everything that was in his shed that needed sorting out. And for the next year, Brian regularly came and gave me messages, so much to the point where Linda said, look, do you mind, this is so accurate, do you mind if I write to Fate and Fortune magazine? And I thought about it. I thought, actually, no, I don't. I mean, I thought if I'm getting these messages, if they're really helping people, let's let it out. By that time, people have got to know that Dr. Rubenstein's a bit weird and he's giving these messages from the dead. And one particularly astounding was Brian said, tell her about the sticks one day. She was in my room. I said, Linda, Brian's mentioning about some sticks. And she smiled and she said, I know what he's going on about. She opened up her shopping list and blue paper. She crossed out her items, and one was garden canes. And she just bought garden canes, which are in her car, from the local garden centre. They were the sticks. So that was how I ended up in Fate and Fortune magazine. By the way, not all my messages are great. I mean, obviously I'm giving you the good stuff. There were some really bad ones, but still, this is the good stuff. This is Paul Dyer. You shouldn't, Paul is why you should have lung cancer. And when Sue came to see me, his wife, after he died, by this time she was saying, come on, Ian, what are you picking up? I said, well, I can see Paul, and he's actually in a boat, and he's seems to be just rowing around some pleasant scenery in some lakes. He said, yeah, that's what he wanted to do. He never got the chance to do it. So I gave Sue some message, and she mentioned it to her son, Adam. Adam had been really, really upset. So she said, do you mind if Adam and his girlfriend come to see you? So I said, fine, they can come and see me. So they came and saw me. And as Adam came into my room, this is Adam and Arga, his wife. I saw some really interesting images, which were of conveyor belts and all sorts of things I couldn't make head or tail of. It turned out that Adam works at the Ocado warehouse, which is the automated grocery shopping warehouse, and his dad had always wanted to see it but never had the opportunity to, and he felt that I'd given the message, and this is what he wrote to me. He actually contacted me on Facebook, and he actually wrote that to me. And Arga, he was struggling after Paul's death, and he got a lot better. I now want to talk about Caroline. Caroline's mum died in October 2019, I think. And when she came to see me, I started picking up stuff about this. And I gave her some pretty evidential messages she felt. But then the pandemic intervened. and we were doing video calls. So sorry, Anne's just messaged me. We want some time for questions. I'll just give this last one. She said her mum died, and I gave her some messages, and we were doing video consults, and I tried giving her a message via video, and the message was I gave her a message of this painting, and she said, that's I saw a footpath covered in sand, and this is something that her sister had painted, which she took. And then I saw a handbag, and she said, oh, Mum's got a handbag, but she didn't know what to make of it. And I said, well, I think your mum wants to open up the handbag. She said, well, I'll have a look at it. And then I saw what I thought was a charm bracelet, but it was like a charm necklace I'd never heard of. She said, oh yeah, actually, Mum's got a thing with a charm necklace. She looked at it, and one of the charms was actually a handbag. And I said, well, does it open? So she opened it up, and inside was a little silver plaque, which said, I love you. And we both teared up. I think I'm going to leave that there now, because there were a couple of others, but I think we'll just leave that there. And I'll now throw it open to discussion.
Thank you, Ian. I'm sorry to curtail that.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Because I know there'll be lots of questions.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to leave some time for the audience. So if you have questions, people, just wave to me, or you can use your blue hand at the bottom of the screen where the participants is. You can put an electronic one on. And I think we've got something up here from Peter already. Peter says, how can we get docs like this on the NHS?
Well, my patients get me on the NHS. I don't know. I mean, it'd be nice if. Look, I mean, I still have misgivings about what I'm doing. I mean, I work within the spiritualist framework, but I buy into it? In my heart, I do, but my head's still got this.
Now yes, we've got another question for you, Ian. Sorry to interrupt, but they're coming in thick and fast. So, do you use mediumship skills in your medical practice? I think what's meant by that is sorry, on you go. You were speaking.
Well, not for diagnosis, although you could argue that in Lucy's case, I did diagnose her depression. You know, when I was going into this, I thought, well, am I going to become a healer? I started exploring that healing, but I thought actually I'm more interested in the instant feedback you get from mediumship. You know, you're only as good as your last message, and you get instant feedback, which is what I like. I'm quite impatient, and when it comes to healing, everybody could, every doctor will say, well, they could have got better anyway. But I wanted to prove to myself, I mean, you know, this is a journey for me. I wanted to prove to myself there was something to this, whatever it was. So, and I pretty much didn't want to muddy the waters between, I mean, if I'm on pretty dodgy ground. I mean, this is like professional ice skating, like skating professionally on thin ice at the best time, giving messages to patients. But to get mixed up with diagnosis, that's probably not a good idea. So keep it slightly removed, just using it in the counselling, mainly for bereavement counselling, I think is what I'm happiest with.
Right. No, I've got just on that. Can I just interrupt you there, Ian, because we've got Caroline, who's one of your patients, I believe, who I think we'd like to comment on that. Caroline, would you like to give us your thoughts on that?
Yes, hello. Ian is my doctor, and also I was seeing a grief counsellor before I knew that Ian could get messages, and the grief counsellor wasn't helping me at all. It was just a waste of time, and I was more unhappy. And then Ian told me what he could do, and he tapped into my mother and my father, and because my father died of cancer several years before my mother, and everything that he gave to me, messages, images, were absolutely accurate. my sister is so involved with my conversations. My daughter wants to know more. What has Ian said about other people in the family? It's been a general conversation going around my sibling and my children and my nephew and nieces. Everybody wants to know more. He has just helped me with my grief. I can now talk about my parents without crying about them because I know they're with me. And I just thank Ian for everything he's done for me. So I think it's been a wonderful
lovely,
gift.
Caroline.
He's absolutely spot on with everything he's told me.
But not for everybody. I seem to have a link with Caroline, with you, Caroline, don't I? It's quite amazing.
Yeah, everything you've told me has helped me so much.
Yeah, it's interesting. Especially, it was quite. I mean, we both teared up when you
We
opened
did.
up that little
I know.
charm. And
My daughter wants me to leave it to her. She said, "Don't you dare give that to anyone else."
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you for speaking up.
That's all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. We have a question here from Jenny Jameson, who says, "What does your fellow doctors think of it?"
I must. Well, I mean, yes. I mean, I thought I was going to be struck off, and I got a complaint. I got a complaint from patients. So, a woman came into my surgery with a sore knee, and I examined her knee, diagnosed it, gave her some treatment. She left the room. Then she promptly complained to my practice manager. You know what the complaint was? My father-in-law died 2 weeks ago, and Dr. Rubenstein didn't give me a message. And that's how I realized that the way I saw the world was completely different to the way my patients saw the world. I'm just, it's a different mindset. Actually, no, I work with a bunch of lovely doctors. I mean, we're dealing with, look, we're in a busy practice. We're at the cutting edge. Especially with the pandemic. One of the senior doctors starts saying, "Hey, I think I'm getting a message from dead people." In a lot of practices, that would be right. Get out. I work in a practice where, as long as you're safe, we encourage each other to develop. I know I'm in the right practice. I mean, I'm eternally grateful to my partners. When I was working with the Transforming Cancer Services team in London, I'm not shy about talking about this because I think if I had these experiences, I need to talk about it. I met some quite senior doctors. There was one professor of pediatric kidney disease. She sat next to me. She said, "Ian, I hear you've written a book. Tell me about it." And she was really interested. But a lot of doctors are interested in this, but they're frightened for their careers. I don't blame them. So they won't actually talk about it. But a lot of them had experiences. I got a bit of flack on some online forums. I remember there was one guy called J.S. Hopkins who said, he wrote on an online forum, "Just you wait until the Daily Mail hear about you." And I thought, well, what you don't realize is that they've already done a very nice spread about me in the Mail on Sunday. Because Keith Bishop, actually, with his PR firm, has got lots of favors he calls in. And one of the favors was Sarah Hartley, who was the health editor of the Mail on the Mail on Sunday. So yeah, so it's been a very interesting journey. Very supportive. I've got a lot of support from my peers.
Well, we have another question about when is it safe to come out. I'm sure this is about mediumship. Priya, I'm going to ask you to ask your question, and you can unmute. So I've got Priya Joshi.
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Unmute?
Hello.
Yes, can you ask your question?
Hi, Ian, thank you for the talk. As a fellow medic, I was just wondering, when do you feel there's a safe time to come out of the closet, as it were? Because that's not something I've done. In fact, this is probably the biggest confession I've made, but I've had experiences not dissimilar to yours, but have kept it all very separate. Just wondered what your thoughts were on that, please.
Look, I don't know. I mean, I felt like, I was in such a state when I had this big Barney with my parents. It was very much a Kundalini experience. I felt I was in the very pits of despair, having been cast out from a very tight, controlling Jewish family, my son, the doctor, all this stuff. It was a big deal for me. And I just couldn't keep it to myself. I was the guy at parties would come up to you, corner you with a celery stick and say, "Guess what happened to me?" And I can never keep these things to myself. So I can't say, I can wholeheartedly understand why would you do this. I used to lie in bed at night thinking, oh my God, why am I doing this? I mean, I'm going to get struck off. It just takes one complaint and that's it. But I just remember what Keith said, they'll catch you. Take a leap of faith, they'll catch you. And you know what? I mean, it was wonderful. I mean, it revitalized my professional life. I wrote a book, ended up on a TV documentary. I'm now giving these talks and met wonderful people. I've been able to help my patients, and I've gone on a journey with my patients. But I actually think it just had to be. But you have to make your own decision, really. And it depends what medical field you're in. I mean, if you're a GP, certainly an old style GP like me, probably easier. We're a bit more independent. If you're working in a hospital where it's all strictly controlled, don't go there because they'll crucify you. I mean, I've met nurses working in A&E who are psychic, and they say they use their psychic gifts to help people, but they won't say anything. I mean, I'm 65. I'm at the end of my career. I wasn't at the end of my career when I came out, I have to say. But now I just think, well, you know what? You know, I think I've earned my stripes now. I think I've got a right to say this, but I've been saying this for years now. So far it's been good, but I can't tell you what to do.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do you think anybody can develop mediumship?
Yes, I do. I really do. I mean, look, everybody can kick a ball, but not everyone can be David Beckham. I'm certainly not a David Beckham of mediumship. My unique selling point is that I'm a GP who does this. And there have been doctors in the past throughout spiritualism who've got in with mediumship. I think I'm just, you know, the man for the moment in this respect. There are other doctors who've done this before. I think we can all develop. I don't think you have to be born with it, although I think it does help to have certain experiences. I did have a near-death experience when I was 9, which I think may have been operative in it, because we do now know that people who have near-death experiences tend to come back with being a bit more open. And probably haven't got time to talk about this. I didn't mention it in my book because when I wrote my book, I didn't realize the association. It was just afterwards, when I was subsequently researching that, I realized that these things happened to people who had near-death experience. And it wasn't, when I say near-death experience, it actually was an experience when I went down under an anesthetic after I had a rather difficult tonsillectomy, and I had to go down and have my tonsils cauterized. And I'd lost a lot of blood. I wasn't at death's door, but I was in the tunnel. There was the light and all that stuff. I didn't meet a being of light, but it was certainly a story I used to tell before I had all my other stories to tell. You know, the day I almost died. So it may have something to do with that. I don't know.
Ian, we have a message here from Jenny Jameson, which is very topical because I know you've spoken to me about COVID in your patch and how difficult that has been and the number of deaths that you've encountered. And Jenny Jameson says, do you think the pandemic and all its tragedies will increase demand for mediumship or understanding of experiences like NDEs and after-death communication?
Yeah, you know what? When I was meditating, and this sounds crazy, I know, but I'm 65 years old, and for ages, I wasn't sure to retire, what I was meant to be doing. Do I want to do it? Don't I want to? I missed my patients terribly. Something made me stay behind, even though I had a really difficult couple of years in terms of work at the practice and now the pandemic. And I was told in my head that you will have a big challenge in your mid-60s. In fact, I don't want to get too churchy. It was like, I think I'm up to it. And then they said, well, Winston Churchill was 65 at the start of the Second World War, and he managed. You can manage too, but it's nothing. So I mean, that's just a thought I had. And then whenever there's been a big loss of life, mediumship comes to the fore. We saw it at the end of the First World War. We saw it at the end of the Second World War. I suspect when this COVID pandemic's done and dusted, there'll be more call for it. So maybe that's something, another reason for me having these experiences. I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I'm going to give you 2 questions in one here. Vicky says, do you go through periods where you are not open to any vision or clairaudience with spirit? And Elspeth Bridges asks, can it be a burden sometimes?
Well, when it's not, it does happen. I mean, yeah, funnily enough, I remember saying when I was in my 20s, I'm psychically dead. I remember I used to go through this feeling when I guess I've always had a feeling of something. I remember saying to people, oh, I just feel a bit psychically dead. And they said, what do you mean by that? I said, I don't know. Yeah, you go through phases when you're a physical being in the physical world at the moment. And I guess you have a job to do here, and this should be your main focus. Yeah, you can't be on all the time. And when I opened up, I was, you go through the space cadet phase where, planet Earth to Rubenstein coming, you lose touch with reality. The true meaning of grounding is really that you don't lose touch with reality. You go through that when you have your Kundalini experience. After a while, it becomes sort of fairly mundane and routine. Yeah, but sometimes you go through phases when it just doesn't work or it's not meant to happen. And then you go through phases when weird coincidences happen and it all comes together. I've had a couple of those today, actually. It was really quite interesting. Just letting me know that I was meant to be giving this talk now, I suppose. So what was the second question, Anne? I couldn't remember.
See, let me go back again. So have you had periods where nothing happened?
Yeah. Oh, and can we all?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've all got it. I mean, whether you can develop it to a degree depends on, it's 99% inspiration, 1%. Let's say 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. I was on a mission. I wanted to find out what the hell happened to me. But I do feel like I've been writing software for 9 years. I felt like I'd looked up from my computer screen. The world had changed. It was as if someone had grabbed me by the scruff of my neck, lifted me up and said, come on, look, there's all this stuff going on. I met all sorts of people. I was introduced to the guys who researched the Enfield poltergeists. Just so many people that I met, which I, didn't expect to meet. It was quite remarkable.
Thank you. I'm going to move on quickly because I've got loads of messages and we're just about out of time. I'm going to ask Kirsty Harris Parker to ask her question herself because we've got another medical professional here. Sorry, let me just see if I can get Kirsty. I had her a minute ago.
Yeah, Riz?
Yeah, we can hear you, Kirsty. Yeah.
Fantastic. So my question is, I'm an HP podiatrist working in healthcare patients every day. And have you, even though you try to resist getting into this topic, because I always like to keep the topic separate from the religion, do you find that patients open up to you first and sometimes will give you a message?
I'm sorry, I can't actually hear you very well. You're a bit quiet.
Oh, sorry. I'm a healthcare professional, so I work with patients daily. I try to keep it separate, so my religion, spiritualism from my patient caseload.
Yeah.
You try and resist to give messages, but do you find that sometimes patients will start a conversation and give you a message, so it then opens the door for a discussion?
Yeah, but not quite like that. What tends to happen is that what happens with me is they look at me and they say, "Come on, Doc, you've got that look in your eye." I say, "What?" I said, "You're picking up something." I said, "Really?" And they said, "Well, what are you thinking?" So they now know when I'm picking up something. The other day, literally, I was in surgery. I was all in my PPE, seeing a lady who had a thing on her chin. I just finished examining her, and she mentioned that her husband had died. And when she said it, I immediately got a load of images. And I said, and she knew what I did. I said, "Look, do you mind if I give you what's in my mind?" She said, "No, she go ahead." And it was quite evidential. I can't remember what it was now, but she took it as quite evidential. And I suddenly realized I wondered why I'd called her down. I didn't actually need to see her, especially nowadays with COVID. You tend not to see patients face to face if you don't have to. But I think I had to see her to give her that message. So yeah, things like that. But have I had messages from patients? Yeah, I've got some patients who are psychic. Like Keith, for instance, to see me. I've got a guy, I think I haven't seen for ages. He used to be the Bart's Hospital painter. He's a spiritual healer. He's in his 90s. And he hangs outside my door and he said, the big man's asked me to come and give you some healing. So he'll just turn up and he'd stand behind me, put his hands on my head and give me some healing, which is lovely.
So you have, it's kind of just the way it's worked out. It's really interesting and spiritual. Yeah, great. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've got 11 other messages, but this is going to be the last one. I'm sorry, people, we just have run out of time. Lisa says, do you think medical school would be better if we actually taught there was life after death? Otherwise, you will always fail eventually. I'm a medical researcher and know many doctors are using auras.
Sorry, many doctors are using what, sorry?
So should it be medical school? Auras.
Yeah.
Auras, I presume to diagnose, but
Yeah.
the question is, should life after death be taught in medical school?
I don't know. I mean, you're crossing into religious territory there, but you're going to have some sensibilities. I think a more useful way of addressing it would be consciousness. What we know about consciousness, the various theories about consciousness. That's a way of introducing it. And I think then you could then go on to explore other ideas of consciousness. That's how I do it. Like I said, I mean, I haven't got any cast iron proof there is life after death. My heart feels like there is, but my head says, nah. So, I mean, you need to look at the research, but I think it's certainly worth talking about. But I can guarantee you that's not going to happen. Guarantee you. I mean, I was told when I was at medical school, I used to hypnotize the kids at school. And I was told when I go to medical school, they teach me that there. They never did. I never learned hypnosis in medical school, even though it's a really useful technique.
Okay, I'm sorry, people. I know there's lots of questions unasked and unanswered, but we're right out of time. And that just shows us what an interesting talk it has been. So thank you very much, Ian, for coming back, albeit virtually, and for sharing your story with us. So once again, Ian's Consulting Spirit.
That's the book. Yeah, sorry, there's a few slides there I couldn't show you, but there we are. That's my book. It's on Amazon. If it says it's out of print, it's print on demand, so you can still get it. It's in Kindle. All proceeds go to cancer territories. I think I make 66 pence out of each book, and I give it to cancer charities. So anyway, there you go. It's the only book I've written. I ought to write another one, but I haven't got time at the moment. It's been lovely giving this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Ian, and thank you everyone for being here. Next week, we have Professor Chris Rowe, who's talking about what we can learn from spontaneous cases of paranormal experiences. So there's a spooky one for you next week. So look forward to seeing you then. But thank you to everyone for being here, and hope to see you next week. And thank you again to Ian. Good night,
everyone.
Thanks very much, Ian. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.